Martin has tried to recreate this formula himself. Late nights, off the clock, in a chipped mixing bowl he keeps in his garage, specifically for this, using 30 years of real chemical engineering experience. 14 attempts this year alone. He keeps a small notebook, just for this, where every failed batch gets a date and a single word. No. Not because he isn't good at his job, because what he's chasing shouldn't be possible to lose completely. And yet it is. Here's what he's chasing. It's 678 AD. Imagine standing on the deck of a Byzantine ship, watching an Arab fleet close in on Constantinople, a fleet that has already conquered nearly everything in its path across the Mediterranean. There is no reason to believe you survive this day. Your hands are shaking, not from cold. Then, around you, strange tubes mounted on your own ship's bow begin to hiss. Liquid fire sprays out across the water toward the enemy ships, and it does something fire is never supposed to do. It keeps burning on top of the water itself. Enemy sailors leap overboard to escape the flames, and the flames follow them into the sea, lighting the water itself like something out of a nightmare nobody on either side has a word for yet. By nightfall, the attacking fleet is destroyed. Constantinople survives, and somewhere in that moment, a secret is born that will outlive the empire that created it, guarded so completely that it will still be unsolved. 1400 years later, sitting in a chipped mixing bowl in a garage, marked with a single word, no, that weapon is called Greek fire. It saved the Byzantine Empire over and over for the next 800 years. And to this day, nobody, not Martin, not any chemist working right now in a fully equipped modern lab, has ever definitively figured out exactly what it was made of. By the end of this video, you'll understand what we actually know about Greek fire, why it's resisted every modern attempt to recreate it, and why the Byzantines guarded it more carefully than almost any secret in human history. If you're new here, subscribe to Ancestral Fix. Every week we find what the ancient world knew and what we're only now beginning to understand again. Stay with me. Let's start with what made Greek fire so effective beyond just being fire. Historical accounts describe it as a substance that ignited on contact, that could be sprayed through tubes mounted on ships, and that continued burning even on the surface of water, which made it uniquely terrifying for naval combat, where jumping overboard was normally the last resort for a sailor facing flames, an escape route this weapon specifically removed. Accounts from the period describe entire enemy fleets turning around and retreating simply at the rumor that Greek fire ships were in the area, without a single shot being fired, without a single flame actually seen. The reputation alone had become a weapon of its own. This is the part that keeps Martin up at night, if he's honest about it. Not the mechanism, the completeness of the loss. Most lost technologies fade gradually, get partially documented, leave fragments behind for later generations to piece together. This one didn't fade. It was cut off, deliberately all at once, by people who understood exactly what they were protecting and exactly how to protect it. The Byzantines used a device called a siphon, essentially a hand pump and nozzle system mounted on the front of a ship, to project the burning liquid at enemy vessels from a distance, giving them the ability to attack without ever needing to board an enemy ship at all, keeping their own crews at a relatively safe distance while inflicting devastating, demoralizing damage. It functioned, in effect, as a medieval flamethrower, roughly 1,000 years before the concept would reappear in modern warfare in anything resembling the same form. Some accounts even describe smaller, portable versions of the device, allowing infantry to deploy something similar to a handheld flame weapon during land battles and sieges, extending its psychological terror far beyond naval combat alone. Here's the part that makes this story genuinely unusual, even among ancient mysteries. The Byzantines did not lose this technology to time or forgetfulness, the way so much ancient knowledge simply faded from disuse. They protected it on purpose, as a matter of deliberate state secrecy, treated with the same seriousness as any modern nation's most classified military technology. Only a small number of people at any given time knew the actual formula and manufacturing process, and access to that knowledge was treated as one of the most closely guarded secrets in the Empire, passed down through an extremely limited circle rather than written into any surviving technical manual that historians could later recover. When Constantinople finally fell to the Ottoman Empire in 1453, after nearly 800 years of Byzantine use, the formula for Greek fire died with the empire itself, and no complete, verified recipe has ever been recovered since, despite centuries of speculation and attempted reconstruction. Ever wonder what it would take to keep a secret for 800 years? That's basically what happened here, and it worked. It's worth pausing on just how much history actually hinged on this one substance. Historians generally agree that Greek fire was a decisive factor in at least two major sieges of Constantinople in 674 and again in 717, both times against forces that vastly outnumbered the defenders. Had either siege succeeded, the entire trajectory of medieval Europe and the survival of Christian Byzantium as a buffer against expansion into the continent could have looked completely different centuries earlier than it eventually did. One chemical formula held by a handful of people arguably reshaped the map of the medieval world. So what do we actually know all these centuries later? Historical texts and modern chemical analysis point toward a combination of a few likely ingredients, some form of petroleum or naphtha, pine resin, sulfur, and possibly quicklime, based on what would have been available in the region at the time, and what descriptions from the period suggest about the substance's behavior and properties. But here's where it gets genuinely difficult for someone like Martin. Some of the properties historical accounts describe actually work against each other from a straightforward chemistry standpoint, which is part of why this particular puzzle has resisted easy solutions for so long. A liquid that could be sprayed through narrow tubes without clogging them, that ignited spontaneously or very easily on contact with air or water, that stuck to surfaces, including wood and ship hulls, rather than simply sliding off, and that continued burning even when doused with seawater, is a genuinely difficult set of properties to combine into a single formula, using only what was chemically available in the 7th century Mediterranean world. Modern chemists have proposed various combinations that replicate some of these properties individually, but nobody has produced a single formula that convincingly matches every documented characteristic at once in the same substance at the same time. That's really what makes this different from most ancient mystery stories. This isn't a case of lost technique being slowly rediscovered through patience and modern tools, the way Roman concrete eventually was, where researchers simply needed to look more closely at what already survived. This is a case where the secret was actively, deliberately destroyed by the people who created it, specifically so nobody else could ever have it, guarded as carefully in life as it remains hidden in death. In a way, the Byzantines' secrecy worked exactly as well as they intended it to, arguably better than they could have imagined, given that it's still working uninterrupted 14 centuries later. Perhaps too well, depending on how you look at it. Martin has run some of the proposed modern reconstructions through the numbers in his own head, comparing them against what the historical accounts describe, and even the best candidates fall short of matching every historical account simultaneously. Something in the exact ratios, the exact preparation method, or possibly an ingredient nobody has correctly identified yet, remains genuinely missing from every attempt so far. It's a strange thing, he'll admit, to spend a career surrounded by precise instruments and controlled experiments and still find yourself stumped by a substance mixed by hand in secret 1400 years ago. There's something worth sitting with in that. We tend to assume that anything achievable by an ancient civilization must be achievable by us now, simply because we have more advanced tools and a few thousand years of accumulated science. Greek fire quietly challenges that assumption. It isn't that the Byzantines had access to some material or method beyond the natural world. It is that they combined ordinary, available materials with a level of practical skill and precision that, without the written formula surviving, has proven surprisingly difficult to reverse engineer from historical description alone. It also says something about how differently the ancient world sometimes thought about knowledge itself. In an era before patents, before intellectual property law, before any modern concept of protecting an invention, the Byzantines still understood intuitively that some knowledge is only powerful for as long as nobody else has it. They didn't try to spread Greek fire, sell it, or teach it widely to allies who might have found it useful in their own conflicts. They kept it inside an extremely small circle for 8 centuries straight, generation after generation, without a single confirmed leak of the actual formula reaching a rival power. In an age of far less secure communication than we have today, that alone is a remarkable feat of institutional discipline. This is really the same quiet theme running through so much of what we cover on this channel, even when the subject shifts away from food and towards something like this. Ancient people weren't primitive simply because they lacked modern instruments. They were often remarkably precise, patient, and skilled with what they had, sometimes precise enough to create something that still, genuinely, stumps experts working with modern chemistry labs today. Let's come back to where we started. Martin in his garage, opening that same notebook to a fresh page, already knowing there's a real chance the word he writes tonight will be the same one he's written 14 times already this year. 30 years into his career, still unable to fully explain a formula that a handful of Byzantine engineers guarded successfully for 8 centuries, using nothing but 7th century materials and absolute discretion. And an empire that understood correctly that some knowledge is only powerful for as long as nobody else has it. If there's one thing to take from today, let it be this: sometimes the most impressive thing about the ancient world isn't what they built. It's what they successfully kept secret so completely that even now, with everything we know, we still can't fully get it back. If this kind of ancestral wisdom speaks to you, consider subscribing, because next time we're looking at a biblical grain that's been quietly feeding people for thousands of years, sitting in a jar most Americans have never once opened. We'd love to have you along.